This topic tonight is really near and dear to my heart because I feel like it gets to the very heart of Jesus. It's also important to demystify what it means to be on mission. Laura and I get up every single day living life on mission. We are on the lookout to do good for somebody. And it doesn't mean we can help everybody, but it means we're intentional. We have an expectation. We're open and willing for God to bring somebody across our path. I've been through some things. I think you have to go through some things sometimes. In fact, often talk about going through my divorce is why I'm so compassionate today. So I had to go through some things to be who I am today. And Laura went through some things too. And I'm so thankful that we could come together and do things together as a couple because we always wanted to do ministry together. One of the key things I want to get across tonight is you don't have to go on a foreign mission to live life on mission. Most of the ministry that Laura and I do is right here in Houston. It's encouragement, a text. Today, I took a friend of mine a new battery bike because he has gone through some things and can't drive and needs that bike to get to work. He's beat it up pretty bad. Well, he's had about 3 accidents now. So his battery wasn't making it all the way to work. He was having to stop and charge it up at a grocery store to make it all the way. So I was able to get him a new bike, take it to him today. And he called me a little bit earlier and he goes, "Would it be okay if I do a post and thank you for this?" And I said, "Well, we've been hanging out for 10 years." I said, "You don't have to do that. I wanted to do this for you. The church wanted to do this for you. And so if you feel it on your heart that you want to post something, I'm okay with it." In fact, it's kind of good that people that know his story and know how long I've been hanging out with Nate, it's kind of good that people know he's still around and that I'm still his friend and hanging out with him. So, but Nate said something funny one time. He said, "Hey, tell Pastor Joel, it's not give us a year of your life for everyone. Sometimes it's give us 5 years of your life." And sometimes it takes people longer. And that's why I always say that, freedom is a no judgment zone. And if you're still struggling after a year, just keep coming and you keep striving to be your best. And like Nate, he's a whole lot better than he used to be. I can tell you so many Nate stories, but we don't have time for them all tonight. But the key thing is that regardless of your situation, no matter what you're going through, no matter what is taking place in your life, even if you're in the midst of a struggle, you can help somebody. In fact, one of the keys to freedom in serving others is if you have a need, sow a seed. I know that's a very churchy thing to say. If you're not very churchy, maybe you haven't heard that. I think most of us use that term, but to me, it is such a principle. You will reap what you sow. And so let's sow some good seeds. So if you have financial issues, and you may be struggling, then help somebody else in need. I know that sounds kind of counterintuitive, but it's so true. If you have a need like finances, sow a seed, help somebody that can't pay you back. Help somebody else. I always say that around marriage too. If you're struggling in your marriage, sow a seed, help another married couple. Of course, get involved with the marriage ministry, go to a counselor, all that kind of thing. But sow a seed in that area where you're having a struggle because that's exactly where you're going to see the harvest come out of planting those good seeds. But there's also some other benefits as we serve others and, just something powerful. I feel like there's a breakthrough that happens as we're helping others because, like I said earlier, it is the heart of God. So as we're serving others, we're really close to God. And especially when we're serving the least of these people that can't pay you back, as I said, but special needs families. I mean, you'll see all the time, Pastor Craig will call me and say, "Hey, we've got this special needs family in need." Well, we drop everything and go help them because they're so special to us. And then single moms, I think it was because of the situation I was in. I have so much compassion for single moms and what single moms go through. But when you serve others in the midst of your struggle, it gets the focus off your issues. So it's hard to sit there and have a pity party if you're out helping somebody else, if you're whether you can build a fence for somebody or you could just help them with their taxes or whatever it is. We'll talk a little bit more about what's in your hand later, but you get the focus off your issues so that they're not magnified, but that you actually sometimes I see that other people are worse off. So Laura and I will say things sometimes like, what are we complaining about? I mean, did you see what they're going through? And so that's the other thing it does. It just kind of gives you perspective because you're like, man, I don't have it so bad, and as bad as it can get, somebody else has it worse. I'm telling you, there are 8 billion people on the earth. Somebody else has it worse than you do. And so it kind of gives you that perspective shift as well. It re-energizes you. I went and helped somebody yesterday. The hurricane we had, Hurricane Beryl, had knocked his fence and a tree was holding it up. And I've gotten pretty good at repairing fences. So I went over and helped this friend of mine out yesterday. And I mean, I was worn out at the end of the day, but at the same time, I felt re-energized. I was thankful that I've learned a few skills to be able to help him because he didn't know what to do. And so that was kind of neat as well. And when you include your family in these things, you also leave a legacy. You get them kind of rooted in helping others as well. I remember when my children were young, we used to do things to involve them, or if we were helping out somebody, we'd have them help out too, because then it becomes just part of what they do. They want to help others and do that as well. And not that we're doing it for this reason, but you're also building up heavenly rewards. I always tell people, make sure your motives are right because I've recently talked to a woman who was serving that I feel like she was serving to meet a need that she had. We want to make sure that we're serving out of the overflow, as Pastor Joel would talk about, that we're serving because, we've matured, we're growing, we're doing our daily devotionals. And so we get to a point to where out of that overflow, we want to help others. We're not doing it out of obligation or for others to see it. In fact, Jesus talked about having the right motives when you pray, when you fast, when you give, that you're not doing it to get other people's attention. So if we do it with the right motives, because Jesus even talks about at the day of judgment, if you're saved, you don't have to worry about going to hell. But there will be a time to where you will be rewarded for the things you did with the right motives. And he talks about how the things that were with the wrong motives will burn away. And so I always like to check my heart because I don't want that stuff to burn away. I want the things I'm doing to help others to last. And so if you're serving to get attention, that's not the way you want to do it. And the other thing it does is, the Bible says we are blessed to be a blessing. So as we're blessed, and, sometimes Christians struggle with this whole thing around financial blessings. Well, if you don't have money, it's really hard to help others. And so I feel like God wants to bless us. The Bible makes it clear that he wants to bless us. Pastor Joel makes it clear that as we make these declarations, we are blessed, we are confident, all those things. But sometimes our mindset could be that, I have to give it all away. But I'd love to have, more money to be able to help more people. But the Bible does say we are blessed to be a blessing. So as we're blessing others, I feel like then God's going to open up the windows of heaven and pour out blessings that we can't even contain. So I just love that. And of course, you can't talk about this subject without talking about the Good Samaritan. And you guys know it, but just a quick recap because it's so important to this whole concept is the story in Luke where Jesus shares how a man was robbed, beaten up. He's laying near death on the side of the road, and a priest comes by. You'd think the priest would help him, but he crosses over the other side of the road and he keeps going on. How many times have I, seen a homeless guy on the corner and crossed to the other side and gone. But this priest you would think would help him. And then a Levite, which is one of the tribes of Israel, and they're the holy ones. They're the priestly ones. You'd think they'd do right, but they kept on going by, maybe ignored him and didn't want him to see him. I've done that before as well. And then this Samaritan, which is Samaritan, is this Gentile, this person that wasn't a Jew, that they weren't even supposed to have anything to do with. They're like dogs, to the Jews. And he comes along, sees this person by the side of the road, all beaten up, everything else. Well, he lifts him up, takes him to an inn, cleans him up, and tells the owner of the inn, hey, when I come back by, let me know how much he owes and I'm going to pay it. And Jesus says, which one of these was your neighbor? And he said, the one that did kindness to this guy. And so it doesn't matter how holy we are, or that's Pastor John, or, so and so. If we aren't kind to the person in need, if we don't look out for each other and be on the lookout on how to help each other, and be on the lookout for these kind of things, then our religion really doesn't matter. And our neighbor is whoever is in front of you. Pastor Joel says it all the time. He can't minister to everybody, even though it seems like he does. But you have a ministry, you have people that you can influence, that you can impact, that are in front of you that he can't. So maybe your neighbor is your neighbor. In fact, after the hurricane, my neighbor had just moved here from Alaska, didn't know what to do. The fence fell down. Our electricity was out for a while, and my neighbor was my neighbor. And so we helped each other out. I helped him and showed him how to rebuild the fence and things like that. And so, we took that approach of helping each other, but it could be, a single mom down the street. One of the things I look out for is somebody's yard not mowed for a long time, because an external sign of somebody having an internal struggle is they're not keeping things in order. And so if I see a yard in disarray and I kind of start paying attention, maybe the husband just left, maybe this, that, and the other, it usually pans out pretty true. In fact, when I went through my divorce, I intentionally kept my yard looking nice because I didn't want it to look like what was going on in the inside. But I'm on the lookout, and that's what I tell you. Let's be mission minded. In fact, Galatians 6:10 says, "Take advantage of every opportunity to be a blessing to others, especially to our brothers and sisters in the family of faith." Now, the key word I pulled out of that is take advantage of every opportunity. Every day, Angela, we're going to have opportunities to bless other people and to help other people. And so be on the lookout to be good to somebody. And sometimes it's a real simple thing. It doesn't need to. In fact, I'll ask people because I might in my mind over engineer what somebody needs to be helped. And so sometimes, we might offer more than they actually need, which there's nothing wrong with that as long as you can fulfill it. I like to under promise and over deliver because there's nothing worse. And we have this happen on mission trips and that kind of thing. Your heart's in it. You go over there, you meet all these kids, and you're promising you'll come back. And then you get back to work and in the routine of things, and you never come back. Well, they're so used to being disappointed. So it's really important for us being service minded to under promise and over deliver. So that way, when you do go the extra mile, when you help somebody and exceed their expectations, then they're blown away. But there is nothing worse than a Christian or anybody that promises the moon, promises they'll do all this for somebody, and then never shows up again. I've probably done it. I don't intend to do it. I do everything I can to not offend somebody else, but I still can. I'm still a man and I'm fallible. But we should take every opportunity to try and bless someone and leave them better than they were before. I also like in that verse, Galatians 6:10, where it says, especially to our brothers and sisters in the family of faith. So everybody on this call, if you're not a believer, we need to get you there. In fact, next month is on salvation. Jesus is Lord. That's the first key to freedom. And so, as believers, when we give our lives to Jesus, we become part of this body. And that's why we can call each other. Angela's my sister from San Francisco. And so, we become brothers and sisters in Christ. In fact, Lakewood, it's so beautiful because it's exactly what heaven's going to look like when we die, because we have every color, every nation. We have heaven on earth, you know. And so we need to be good to each other, looking for opportunities to bless each other, especially our brothers and sisters in the family of faith. I was talking to somebody yesterday that had started a nonprofit. He was passionate about helping youth. And he starts doing this, and the person he was partnering with in another city got offended and just cut him off, quit doing the work with him of the ministry. And when my friend reached out to him, trying to apologize for anything he might have done wrong, trying to reconnect and build that bridge, the other person wouldn't have anything to do with him, wouldn't accept his apology. That's not the right attitude, you know. And first thing I'll do if I offend you in some way, or, you know, even if I feel like I didn't do anything wrong, if I unintentionally hurt your feelings, didn't follow up with you, you know, you feel like I ignored you, whatever it is, I can promise you this, that wasn't my intention. And I'll do everything I can to apologize for that, make things right. I even have a leadership teaching called Being Hard to Offend. You know, you can try to offend me, but it's really hard. And that's what, as Christians, we should get to this place of being hard to offend and working with others and that kind of thing. But, you know, it's really funny on it. When we go on vacations, you know, during the pandemic, it was still cheap to go to Cancun from Houston. It's gotten a little more expensive. We're not doing it like we were, but we were isolated. And when we could start traveling again, it was a cheap trip to go to Cancun. But my wife amazes me because she would be on the beach. People would come by with jewelry and I'm shooing them away. And next thing I know, this guy is FaceTiming with his wife on the beach because she's become friends with him. She prays for his diabetes, which I wouldn't even have asked him and known that. She prays with his wife on the phone because she's dealing with depression and this kind of thing. And then we're having dinner at the all-inclusive hotel. And she starts telling me how the Carlos, who's from Cuba, has two kids to feed. And they say it's all inclusive, including tips, which I felt good about. But she shared with me how they don't distribute that equally. They don't give them much out of that. You can hear my wife laughing in the background, and gave me a new perspective. But I love how even on vacation, she doesn't take a vacation from finding every opportunity to be good to somebody. And I have met so many people that I wouldn't have met if it wasn't for my wife taking time to listen to somebody, getting to know them. It helps that she speaks Spanish. I'm working on it as well. I'm actually one of the producers of the Freedom Spanish. So you can imagine how funny that is. I'm sitting there Google translating as the night's going on, but I did okay last night. But I admire the fact that she is on the lookout, even on vacation, to get to know people. And she's kind of shifted my perspective around some of those things. And one of the things that I want to kind of focus on more is what I call the ICU challenge. And that's really about this perspective. So 10 years ago, I was over the men's ministry, and we would meet Wednesday nights before the service. Back when we had Wednesday night services, the men and women would meet separately. And a guy by the name of Christian Buckley was 18 years old. He's still part of Freedom, stuck with me today, 10 years later. So he's 28 now. But at the time, I was talking about owning your story. And I challenged the men in the room. I said, ask a guy to go out for coffee and ask him what his story is. And Christian Buckley asked me to Starbucks. And at the age of 18, we sat down and he told me his incredible story. And we started hanging out together and he became part of Freedom. And those of you online may not see him because he's a servant behind the scenes, but he's part of our media team today. But he took time to hear my story and to share his story. And the ICU challenge is taking time, like Laura, like Christian, to, even if it's one person, ask them their story, work to go below the surface to get to know people better. There's nothing worse to me than going to a funeral. There was a friend of mine, Dean, who helped me in a time of need when Laura and I took in two disabled girls who were being abused. It was really hard because I was carrying the paralyzed girl up and down the stairs at our house because it wasn't made for people with disabilities. And her mom had withheld food from her. So all of a sudden she's eating again. Well, I started feeling that extra weight. She got up to 100 and I think 30 pounds. And twice a day I was carrying her up and down the stairs. And that's one of the reasons I expedited my arthritis in my hip and had to get a hip replacement. I'd do it again though. I'm thankful for my new hip. I'll show you the scar if you want. And I knew I'd get Laura with that one. I probably got Vanessa too. But Dean, one day I was looking for an apartment for the girls. They lived with us for 7 months. And I drive up to an apartment complex and it was like heaven's gates. I drive up, the gates open. There's music playing in my mind. There's beautiful flowers. I love flowers, and my favorite flowers are there. I walk inside, and this guy, Dean, comes up to me and he goes, "Welcome. Come in and talk to me. What do you need?" And I said, "Well, it's not for me. I'm a pastor." And he said, "Pastor?" He said, "I'm an usher at Lakewood Church." And I was like, what are the chances, And he pulled out all the stops. In fact, out of his own pocket, he expanded the doorway so her wheelchair could go to the bathroom and make it easy for her to transfer. But Dean struggled with isolation, depression, alcohol. And so he started going to Maximize Manhood for a short amount of time. But a man at his apartment complex one day was on the roof fixing something, got electrocuted and passed away. And I really think Dean died of a broken heart. But he died about probably 2-3 years after I had met him. He was an amazing angel. I shared at his funeral. But at his funeral, his daughter plays this video of Dean with this amazing voice playing the guitar. I didn't know he could play the guitar. I didn't know he could sing. I just appreciate the fact that he helped me get an apartment for the girls. But there's been so many funerals I've gone to where somebody I thought I knew, you may have had this happen as well. You learned something and you were like, I didn't know that about them. So part of the ICU challenge is challenging ourselves, especially for those we're serving with and those around us or in our small groups here. Really challenge yourself to ask them questions about themselves, to go beneath the surface, to ask them their stories. Even this week, go out and ask somebody their story, even if it's online, reach out and ask somebody their story because it's amazing what you can learn about somebody. And there may be somebody, a lot of people put on a happy face, put on a good face, but there may be somebody struggling with something right now that they're just smiling through it and they need somebody to talk to and they're reluctant to share. But as you give them permission, sometimes it's the ministry of presence. It's just being there. It's just being available. It's just listening to them more than we're talking and just being curious about others. Shouldn't we be curious about God's creation and about, these people that are around us and things like that? So it's just amazing. And one more neighbor story. So this was a long time ago, but I was fairly new as a Christian, but I could hear, promptings from God. And my neighbor was one of my best friends. And his wife left him for her professor and moved out. And he was there with the kids. but he could not afford to keep up the house. And so he made it about 6 months. And one day he told me that he couldn't keep it up. So his wife was moving back in with the professor. And I was like, this is hard. So my new neighbor is going to be the professor, and I'm losing my friend. He's got to move somewhere else. I don't know how y'all would think about that. But the yard had gotten up like 2 feet high. I mean, well, that may be an exaggeration. Let's say, 8 inches high. It was pretty high, especially the backyard. And I'm out there mowing my yard. The next day, the woman and the professor are going to move into the house. And I'm mowing the yard and I hear this prompting. You'd mow it for him, but will you mow it for her? My God. And I remember it like it was, today. It was so hard, but I mowed her yard as well. And I wanted her to think the husband, ex-husband, had done it, to think good thoughts about him and all that kind of stuff. But the daughter saw me do it and shared. And so the next day they're moving in and she comes up and thanks me. And, I meet the professor and then God's like, help him move in. And so I started carrying furniture in, with them as well. Sometimes it's hard, it's become easier. Back then it was hard. I probably wouldn't have as big an issue now. But there may be still things that, we never get over being human. We just become more spiritually mature or maybe more experienced in this kind of thing. But, I think that saying we always say is still relevant today. What would Jesus do? WWJD, or what would Joel do? The reason I say what would Joel do is he's amazing. Paul said, follow me as I follow Christ. And whenever I think I'm working harder than anybody else, why can't I take a break? I watch Pastor Joel in the hallway of the church or up by the bookstore, shaking hands and staying 2 hours after the 11 o'clock service. And then he has to go edit his videos, shaking every single hand of the visitors that come to Lakewood. And there's this long line. And he doesn't have to do that. And I think, wow, what would Jesus do? What would Joel do? You know what he'd do? We can ask it today. He'd help the least of these. He'd go after the one. He would forgive and help his enemy. He would go the extra mile to help somebody in need. He would give self sacrificially for somebody else. And so I just want us to have that perspective that God has such a servant's heart, sharing the stories around the least of these. Who's your neighbor? And so I wrote down just a few thoughts for today, as far as some serving others suggestions, because Pastor shared it in a message one time, and I think it's so powerful. You think of Moses, he stuttered, he was a murderer, he spent 40 years running from his calling. He totally messed up and missed it, but God used him. And God one day says, what's in your hand? And he had a staff, and when he put it in the river, it parted. And he used that also with Pharaoh. It turned into a snake. And so the question for us is, what's in your hand? I think about, it was over 10 years ago, Laura. Laura and I started going to this little church. I was still a pastor at Lakewood, but there was this cute little church we got connected with over close to our house in Scarsdale. It's south of Houston. And they had this teeny house. They were having church in it, and they had this little bathtub, and they were water baptizing people in that bathtub. And so I have a pool. Y'all have probably seen it in some of the videos because I love being out there. But I said, why don't y'all, when you need to do the baptisms, come to our house or come to my house at the time, and we'll do water baptisms there. And then I cooked everybody, and it was a pretty poor church, made them all hamburgers and things like that. And then we had a little pool party afterwards and all that celebration. But that was just a little thing. I had a pool in my hand. I guess that sounds weird, but I had a pool, and there was a church that was water baptizing in this tiny little bathroom in the house. And so they were able to come over, and that was a neat season. Everything's kind of in seasons and things like that. But, I was able to do that. we all have something that is near us that we could do something with. So it doesn't have to be big. You don't necessarily have to go to Africa or India or those kind of things. But if you have the opportunity and God calls you to it, go for it. But it might be wherever you live, going across the street to bring a sick neighbor some soup, or a coworker from work helping them through a difficult time. But I wrote some of these down. Do something simple to bless someone today who can't pay you back. It's huge when it's easy. Well, it's not always easy. I learned to hold it loosely. Like, I had an ex-brother-in-law that I gave money to and he never paid me back. And I held a grudge for a long time, and that didn't do me any good. And I never got it paid back. And even after I was divorced, he asked me for money. But this time I gave it to him with an open hand. Even though he said he'd pay me back, I didn't expect it back. And so, we have to keep our hearts right in that. But do something for somebody that can't pay you back. Do you have an elderly neighbor? Bring them a meal or ask them if they need help. Call or text someone you haven't seen or talked to in a while. Let them know you are thinking of them. See a neighbor whose house isn't mowed, like my friends. Take a few minutes to mow it for them. Volunteer for a local shelter or food pantry. Do you have an expertise? If you're an accountant, help somebody in financial trouble, or help somebody that's elderly do their taxes or something like that. Invite a friend or coworker to come to service with you this Sunday, or join Freedom Night. There's a whole lot of people that need Freedom Night out there. They just need to be aware. They need to be invited. Thank y'all for being so engaged.